Hi, everybody. This is Gerald Rollies, and today we have an amazing guest. His name is Dr. John Harmon, and he runs the Clear Mind Idaho facility here in the Treasure Valley of Idaho. And so today, Dr. John, thank you for being here. I appreciate you sharing what you got to my audience.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So if you could, can you just go ahead and share with the audience a little bit about your background and, as you became a doctor and, where it's taking you to today with the neurofeedback work that you perform?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little bit of a roundabout trip. It was getting to where I am right now. I wanted to be a chiropractor since I was a little boy. And even though the desire to what I referred to back then was flip brains, started when I was in my 20s. I come from a large family, and the oldest in our family was a girl. My oldest sister, beautiful homecoming queen, married the Florida State basketball star, never showed any signs of mental illness, and then had 3 babies in 3 years. And the doctors just said something flipped in her brain. I'll never forget that. And the feeling that I had, and I just wanted to say to them, why don't you just flip it back? If it flipped, you got to be able to flip it back. But I still wanted to be a chiropractor. I went on, had a family and went to chiropractic college, at that point, about a 22-year career. I had expanded into ozone therapies, oxidative medicine, got certified in that. And then in 2010 and 2011, we had some really severe emotional trauma in my family, which shook us to the core. It was a suicide of my 18-year-old niece in March of 2010. And then the murder of my oldest daughter's husband in March of 2011. And my younger daughters at that point, their brains flipped, so to speak. They had anxiety, depression, insomnia. And we went the traditional route for about 4 years with prescription drugs and counseling. And it just wasn't working for us. So I initially went on a journey to help them, or to find something to help them help their brains and flip their brains, which led me into the neurofeedback arena, which then led me into functional neurology arena and laser therapy. And I shifted. I went a little bit different direction. And now at Clear Mind, Idaho, metaphorically speaking, I'm flipping Bev's brain back every day.
That's awesome.
Plus my own daughters. And so that's what floats my boat, brings me joy, when I see that we've actually just revealed the real person inside, who's not known for their symptoms like anger or anxiety or depression. Those tend to be labels because that's the way we act, but it's just because our brain is not quite working right, and we just need to flip it.
Yeah. And there's, I'm seeing a lot of individuals who have challenges, neurological challenges, from something as simple as just loss of balance, or easily to have a temper tantrum in a child, or easily agitated. And, we see that all the time. And I'm sure you see that. And can you tell me a little bit, obviously you've been able to work with now family members, and you've found solutions to help these individuals that are obviously not very conventional, and in a way more of a natural, kind of a supporting, let's help the normal functioning of the nervous system. Can you tell us a little bit about what neurofeedback does and how it helps the people you work with? And what is it looking to correct? Or I know the term is to flip the brain back
yeah,
on, or
technical
back
term, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, maybe you can dig a little bit deeper and talk about the nervous system, how it's helping. And I know I have some other colleagues that will also do some brain mapping, and maybe you can tell with us if that's something you do. I know there's some neurologists that will perform EEGs, because oftentimes a lot of individuals in the conventional model will want to go to a neurologist, and they'll strap them to, find some sort of problem in the brain. But can you share a little bit about your experience with neurofeedback over the years and working with cases and what you've seen.
Yes, sure. I actually, when I decided to go in this direction, I knew that I needed to go get some specialized education. Um, Passion, this is a saying that goes through my head all the time: passion without education can be dangerous. And I always say I was, after all, really passionate about driving when I was 13. I just didn't know how to do it yet. So my background is in chiropractic and oxidative medicine. Whether you go to medical school or chiropractic college, you don't learn about QEEGs. And so I went to the board that certifies people in QEEG and neurofeedback to get that education, so I'd know what the heck I was doing. And I started doing exactly what you just talked about, a quantitative EEG, and that's what I was certified in. Well, what is that? That is a look at the electrical balance or imbalance in the brain, and it's where areas get too far out of the range of normal, where symptoms. And I'll never forget, during that education, one of the instructors said this sentence, and it changed the way I look at people forever. He said, when someone's beta waves between 15 and 21 hertz is too high in magnitude, meaning it's too powerful, they're angry. I thought, man, that just changes the way you look at people. And we have things like you said, where kids are brought into you or to me, and mom or dad says, you know, something will happen. He'll flip in an instant, go from 0 to 100, and can't re-regulate all day long. That is not a personality problem. That is a brainwave dysfunction. There's either too much or not enough electrical activity in certain parts of the brain. When I would explain someone QEEG to them, I would go into a lot of detail about, you know, this is normal, this is green, and red is 1 standard deviation above normal, and yellow is 2. And I've gone into that, and it's kind of, I think they probably thought it was kind of boring. I liked doing it, but truly, when it came down to it, what they cared about was, did my anger and anxiety go away? Am I able to sleep now? Do I not have depression anymore? They really didn't care about the colors of the brain map. Well, I did that for 5 years with the quantitative EEG and a little bit older style neurofeedback called operant conditioning. That style trains the brain to do the right thing. 60-year history of success. I have no regrets about doing it because we helped thousands of people. But then a newer system came along, and instead of training the brain, it goes to the primitive brain and untrains it from the faulty pattern that it's stuck in. And so it's much quicker. It takes somewhere, for 95% of the people, somewhere between 10 and 20 visits rather than 40 to 60.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And if you look at, just briefly, remember in movies we see where they do shock therapy and people are screaming and all of this, it looks terrible. Well, science has advanced so far, the electrical impulse that goes in is 3 trillionths of a watt. You cannot feel it. It's imperceptible. But it just kind of gently nudges those neurons in that primitive brain, and it kind of like wakes them up. Like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. And then it starts regulating itself, sometimes really quickly. Most people notice a decrease in anxiety the very first session.
Yeah, it was phenomenal. You know, when I brought my son in for his, you know, very first session, I remember seeing how you know, the brainwave activity was elevated in specific areas, and you guys were pointing that out exactly. And what's phenomenal, it's live, you know, so even parents who have their children under in a session can see what's going on. And then as things progress throughout the session, it's amazing to see it calm down. pretty quickly. And
Yes.
so it's pretty awesome, the fact that you can gather that information live and you can see it in action. And I loved it when you had my son, clench his teeth, and he clenches his teeth and you can see where the brain is active.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's pretty phenomenal. And of course, he didn't feel anything. And, at a child who's of a young age, we wanted to be as easy and as fun and as beneficial, therapeutic as possible. So I love that about how you guys actually perform the sessions and the treatments.
Yeah, and they don't have to sit there for a long time. And that was one of the drawbacks of the older style, because you had to sit still for half an hour.
Oh, wow.
So it limited the age where we could actually do it. We only had, in the 5 years I did the acute EEG and neurofeedback, we only had one child that was under 6 years old that could sit still long enough. And so this one, we could actually be in the delivery room after a traumatic birth, hook the leads up to a newborn and do microcurrent neurofeedback on that newborn and re-regulate the brain from a traumatic birth.
Wow. I mean, if my wife were to have more children with me, ours are a little bit older to have another one, but I'm now thinking that would have been amazing, because the delivery process, birth, being for some scenarios at a hospital can be very traumatizing.
Yes.
Just birth in general can be traumatic for not only the mother, but also the child. And then with that thought too, not only having the baby experience it, could the mother benefit after the delivery from it as well?
Yes, absolutely. Well, everybody can benefit from it because life, and I explain this to everybody, and it's a quick explanation. And I ask people to think of what happens when our fight or flight gets turned on really quickly. It's for emergencies. And that happens in the delivery room. You got, holy cow, something's going on. There's all of these bright lights and I'm scared and all of this stuff. And the three things that do that to people to cause them to get out of balance would be some kind of head trauma, emotional trauma, or chemical exposure. And that's what you and I talked about. You have a lot of patients who come in who have all of these toxicities. And it's one thing to pull those things out of the body. The body is so important. I'm a recipient of many amalgam fillings from my uncle, who was a dentist, that had to be removed. But once those are removed, the brain dysregulation is still there. So that's where we come in and fix that part of it.
Yeah, and I love how we have, I have a lot of individuals when they come in, we find that they may have inflammation in different parts of the brain. And for some people, that could be presenting as tics or Tourette's or speech challenges or balance issues, depending on the part of the brain, because each part of the brain controls so much. The back of the brain controls vision and balance and memory. And then we have over the parietal lobes, we have the Broca's and Wernicke's that has to do with speech, that has to do with interpretation of speech. And then we have motor control, along the middle, in terms of individuals who maybe don't have good control with their reflexes and their muscles. And so we know the brain is so important. And oftentimes when people come in, I'll find different areas that are inflamed and then help the body and find which heavy metals and chemicals or foods that are causing inflammation and start them on the nutritional support to start to allow the body to eliminate those. And what I love is then they can go and see you for the work that you do. And while those stressors have now been removed, you can go and help that brain unlearn these, or your device and your sessions can help it unlearn these defense mechanisms or the stored trauma, and to eventually start to get them back to how the brain used to be or should have been. Can you share a little bit about more now? You talked about the primitive brain and you mentioned the sympathetic autonomic nervous system, the fight or flight. Can you talk about the importance of the parasympathetic nervous system and how this work that you do is actually helping that?
Yes, I'd love to do that. But I first want to say how much I appreciate and value and admire docs like yourself who approach things from a totally different viewpoint, knowing that it's these things just don't happen randomly. The seizures, tremors, ticks and all those things, there's a reason for that. It's heavy metals or it's toxin, parasites, viruses, bacteria, fungus. There's something going on. And I so appreciate and respect that viewpoint rather than, something happened and now you have ticks. Here's a drug.
Right. Yeah.
Let's address that issue. So yeah, that fight or flight, sympathetic, parasympathetic balance. And for those who aren't familiar with those terms, sympathetic nervous system is the one that it's the part of our emergency response system, or something coming at me, either emotional, something's chasing me, or I have to go after something. I have to ramp everything up instantly. I can't sit back and think about it. There are certain things that come with that activation. One of them is anxiety. You better be anxious if you're running from a tiger. You're going to probably die. So the other thing is increased adrenaline, increased hyper vision. I have to see the tiger in the reeds. And so my vision gets exquisite. I mean, I can see really everything. That turns into OCD later if that stays on. Hypervigilance, military people, they're taught to look at everything and everyone. And so they come home and they can't shut that off. So that's one of our emergency response systems. The opposite of that, it can't fire at the same time, is another emergency response system for your viewers. It's, hey, there's food in your stomach. I got to shut some things down and I got to activate some things. Well, the things that have to be activated would be digestion. And so that system fires up. The key point here is they have a teeter-totter relationship. If one goes up, the other one neurologically gets inhibited and goes down. And so we have this problem where someone's fight or flight gets severely activated. If it's severe enough, it only takes once, but it's normally repetitive activation. Kids who have a lot of trauma at home, physical, other abuse, are under constant siege, and that system starts to stay on rather than coming back down to neutral at the expense of digestion, sleep, feel good, and immune system function. They all get inhibited when the fight or flight is kind of on. So if the fight or flight, sympathetic, is dominant, I don't sleep well, I can't shut my brain off, I'm hyped up, I'm on the edge sometimes, well, at least underlying anxiety or almost at a panic attack. It's because of that system being out of balance, not because of personality thing they have going on.
Yeah.
So we all have different personalities, but not because of that.
Right. So what you're finding is oftentimes when individuals are coming in, and probably the bulk of the individuals who are going to respond really well to neurofeedback typically are going to lean more on the sympathetic dominant side, where their parasympathetics are not able to jump in when they need to help them digest properly and rest and repair and heal. Is that what you're finding in your practice when individuals come in?
I would say 100% of the time when someone ends up in our office, their parasympathetic is underactive.
Okay. So it's not just children and parents. It's literally anybody in this go society where there's stress everywhere, basically.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, and I too, am benefiting from these therapies, even though I may perceive myself not needing the help, but it's important that everybody's brain is balanced and able to pretty much turn on the sympathetics and the parasympathetics when it's needed. And unfortunately, what it sounds like is a lot of individuals' brains are being trained to lean more into the sympathetic, and then the body over time stays in that pattern and has difficulty coming out of it in times of healing and resting. So can you share with me, because I love your assessment strategy. You obviously use energetic assessment tools like I do. And, and I love how you go through a quick neurological assessment aside from your thorough intake. Can you talk a little bit about what people can expect when they go into your clinic and start working with you, and what your assessment involves? Because I love how you're running through all the different neurological. You mentioned, you are trained in functional neurology, and you're assessing the parasympathetics and the sympathetics, and really fine-tuning exactly what their baseline is before you start even a treatment program. And then if you could just share with the audience a little bit more what that looks like.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. We know that most parts of the body get input from both systems. Sometimes you have to do things a little faster, and sometimes you got to slow things down. And there are certain functions in our body. I test 14 of them that are easily testable, that only get nerve input or nerve supply from the parasympathetic. They don't have any sympathetic input. And so we'll test those functions. They have to do with facial muscles, eye movements, swallowing, puffing. And one that's really interesting that I'd like to touch on maybe before we're finished, and that's blood pressure regulation. So we go through those. I test those. Puffing cheeks. Interesting. People will come in, I'll say, puff your cheeks out. And one of them will go way out, and one of them will just barely move. Even without testing, I know that that's not functioning right. So because of the insult of being inhibited so long by the sympathetic being dominant, these things start to not function. Some feel like swallowing. People who maybe have a difficult time swallowing pills or food, maybe even choke when they drink liquid, feeling like it doesn't go down very well. That's one of the things that we test. There's a little reflex for the eyelid to close called the glabellar reflex. And to see in a Parkinson's evaluation, you do this, and both of them will blink. But those go through those 14 functions, get an assessment. Okay, that's a snapshot. How healthy is your parasympathetic right now? And then repeat that. A few months ago, we had this one woman, I've never seen it before, where only one of those was actually functioning. So 13 out of the 14 were not. And here's a woman who's suffered so long from chronic illnesses. Her immune system is so bad she can't render the final blow to this virus and this bacteria and all these things. And I looked at her and I said, you're the worst I've seen. And then the tears came. There's an answer for why I feel so terrible. On her halfway point, I retested her, and only one of them was not functioning. But she went from almost all to only one left. And that was an exciting day to see, hey, that nervous system is coming back on. So if you can restore balance, if that's the only thing we ever did is restore the balance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, many, many good things happen in all parts of the body.
That's amazing. That's great. And I work with patients all over the country, and, get cases with symptoms of autism and all kinds of different neurological cases. And I'm always working with individuals remotely, because from the herbs and nutrition, I can send it to wherever they are in the country. But when it comes to the neurofeedback, I'm always networking with other neurofeedback practitioners across the country, so that my patients who are working with me, wherever they are, can get to somebody. Because having access to this, and one of the practitioners that I've networked with and referred to has had success with individuals who've had symptoms of strokes. And because she herself had actually had a stroke and had the inability to speak, and it was because of the neurofeedback work, exactly the way you perform it, she can now speak. And now, of course, she is using this as her main modality to help others. What are some of the things, or what are things that people can think about that could potentially benefit from neurofeedback work if they're dealing with or suffering with? What are some things you've seen in your clinic?
I'll start with the most common, anxiety. And the reason it's the most common in our clinic is that's how it all starts. And that was in my quantitative EEG training as well. The first symptom to appear almost all the time is some kind of anxiety related to the overactive fight or flight. If that stays long enough, then it turns into depression. The three biggies I would say are anxiety, depression, and insomnia. But tinnitus, seizures, tremors, chronic pain, OCD, anger is a big one now. People come in and, the spouse is there with them and they tell this story where he didn't used to be like that, but he hit his head and now, man, short fuse. And so here's an example as well. We had this guy who was a Vietnam vet. He was exposed to Agent Orange, and the poor guy had skin cancers and had tremors in his hand. And when he was all finished, he said, from the first session you treated me, my hand stopped tremoring. I never had to take my Parkinson's med again. That was rewarding to hear that from him. Those are the most common. There are other different, tics, Tourette's, those things. You mentioned speech being over here on the left side. There's kind of an interesting side note. Exactly opposite from speech. On the right side, the exact same spot is where joy is processed. I have a theory. Women have 20% more connecting fiber side to side in the corpus callosum. My personal opinion, because I'm a happily married man, women get more joy from speaking. Okay.
And so men need to turn on, where's the listening portion of the brain? Where's that found?
We haven't discovered that yet.
Okay. Because we got to make sure it's working, it's balanced.
Exactly. Maybe if I could, that would be my calling in life, is figuring out how to turn the listening system on for men who want to have a happy marriage.
Yeah, I'm always reminded to work on that.
Yeah.
Wow,
we have
amazing.
our idiosyncrasies. Yeah. But we really honor the women that we're married to.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, this has been phenomenal. I appreciate you sharing who you are, your journey, even background about neurofeedback and how you work with people. And I love the fact that you're able to thoroughly analyze the strength of the parasympathetic and where they're out of balance. And then even in the future re-exam or reassessments, you're able to gauge progress from your methodology. Obviously, individuals are going to see the symptoms start to disappear and fade away as their brain starts to become balanced. Where can people find you if they're looking for more help and want to come in for an evaluation?
We are located in the El Dorado Business Park in Meridian. It's right off of Eagle Road, 2971 East Copper Point Drive, Suite 125. And you can Google us and find that out. Phone number is 208-999-0541. ClearmindIdaho.com is our website, and the same name for Facebook. I did want to say something about blood pressure, if I could.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. You talked about an assessment. Okay, so we had this young boy, he was 15, autistic, was in bed for 4 years because of POTS. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, positional orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. When I stand up, I can't maintain my blood pressure, my heart rate shoots through the roof, or I'll pass out. Or sometimes you just do and you can't stand up. So he was in bed for 4 years, diagnosed from the pediatrician with POTS. He also had autism. Went through what we do. And one of the things I test is blood pressure regulators right here in the carotid artery. And his were just shot. When he was finished, Mom sent us a video of him skiing and the news that the pediatrician had re-diagnosed him and he does not have POTS anymore. So this was a big deal. And sometimes people, not all the time, but sometimes their blood pressure can be off simply because their parasympathetic nervous system is under functioning.
Right. As a former pharmaceutical sales rep, we used to market blood pressure lowering medications, and some of these blood pressure medications would actually lower the heart rate. And a lot of these, there's a class of drugs known as diuretics, right? So yeah, the concept that high blood pressure is caused by water, right? Too much water in your system, so we're going to dehydrate you. To me, never sounded right. Now, for anybody who is on a blood pressure and lower medication or any medication, never stop any medication without the guidance of your prescribing physician. But to your point, it goes to show that heart rate, blood pressure, and the ability to stand up and not get lightheaded, dizzy, or pass out, it all has to do with neurology. And neurology and the nervous system controls the health and the functioning of all the other organs as well. So
love that.
Great story. Great story. All right. Well, Dr. John, I appreciate your time. And
thanks so much, Doc. It's been fun. I always enjoy talking to you, and I hope some of your patients can be helped.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the ones that, I mean, basically almost everybody needs it. And I know that for the ones that are, whereas we're pulling out the heavy metals, helping the body draw them out and the inflammation is coming down, it's the best time for them to go see you, to have their brain unlearn those compensatory mechanisms and get those parasympathetic balance with the sympathetic. So anyways, thank you for being on here, and I look forward to collaborating with you even more.
Thank you so much.